Welcome to SIG-Windows. It's March 21st, 2023. This is our weekly community meeting. It is a CNCF project, and so we follow the CNCF guidelines and code of conduct. So if you're not familiar with those, that just means to be nice to everyone. And if you have any concerns or questions, you can reach out to one of the leads or any of the CNCF representatives. So otherwise, we can go ahead and get started today. For announcements, we have test freeze is today. So if anybody has anything related to tests, let us know. We did have a failing test from GCE, which we were just discussing before this meeting in our triage meeting. And I've added it to the end of the agenda here so we can discuss it here in a few minutes. But is there anybody else that has anything related to test freeze that we should know about? Cool. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to new contributors. Welcome to any new contributors out there. Is there anybody that would like to say hello and let us know what you're up to? If not, we'll just move on here. Great. So we'll go ahead and start the agenda. KPNG.
Let's move the KPNG direction to later. I
Okay.
added that, or well, Jay and I were going to talk about that, but I think we should talk about the test failure or like this other thing first.
Okay, I'll move this to the top.
Yeah, I will. I just wanted to quickly mention the annual reports. So the annual report is something that each SIG is required to do once a year. And it's mainly just to monitor like the health of the community. The annual reports, a draft PR was required to be open by this Friday. I've got a draft PR open for the SIG-Windows annual report linked here. Everybody or anybody, please take a look at that and leave any feedback you have. Yeah, I think now we could probably go back to talking about this issue. For anybody who's new to or just joined the meeting, we're looking at there's a Slack thread and an issue and a pull request to hopefully resolve the issue around a change in behavior for the DNS resolution for Windows that we're looking at. It looks like it caused some issues with how the GCE tests are configuring things. So
I'll drop the issue into the chat here. So this is the issue. And then here's the PR. Claudio, do you want to give a quick overview for everybody?
Yeah, basically, there's a flag for kubelet called --resolve-conf, which typically it is supposed to be a file, which is how it works on Linux as well, which will basically contain DNS configuration options, which will also get applied to pods. For example, if you have some cluster-specific DNS config options, you might actually want to have that option set. Typically, let's say on Linux, you would get the /etc/resolve.conf file and apply those configuration options, which you have on your host as well. And we have added the same ability to get the host DNS options from Windows as well. If you set the flag to --resolve-conf equals to host with a capital H. But in doing so, we introduced a small regression which is supposed to get fixed in a pull request which is sent for this. Basically, the regression is that in doing so, we remove the ability to have the same resolve.conf like files available on Windows, which will have to be reintroduced soon in this pull request, which is shown right now. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it, since I have some comments to address.
Yeah, I guess my first question is, since it's test freeze and this is breaking things, do we, I guess I'll just say, do we feel confident? Do we want to revert the original PR and just try to make sure, like, sort this out for 128, or do we think that this is the right thing to do?
I'm
And-
fine. I'm fine either way, but technically the pull request which is sent, it's quite small. It doesn't really do much.
Yeah.
There's just one if which is relevant.
Yeah, I think that I was looking at this a little bit. I think Tim's question is probably the most relevant question for the pull request, and the rest of it looks pretty straightforward.
I mean, it was already approved as host already. I mean, we can change the option to be something else. I don't know.
So is this if you set the setting as host, then it would look it up in the registry versus looking it up on the file?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. I mean, in the original discussion on the pull request, we basically agreed on host as a name, and now apparently that's being questioned as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my take would be that without the full file path, host is okay.
Yeah.
Typically, you'd give a full file path in Windows. So.
Yeah, so then the other question is, do we want to support like partial file paths or say that they must be absolute? I think we should just say they must be absolute file paths if it's not the hosts.
I mean, relative paths are quite ambiguous. Relative to whom?
Yeah, is it relative to the kubelet or?
Does anybody else have any input?
Well, I think Tim's question is if it could potentially be a path. I think he wants us to assert that it's actually a path, but then he says that's a breaking change.
Oh, I don't think he said it is. I think he just asked us to confirm does a relative path work today.
Oh, I see. I sometimes find it hard to parse some of these questions.
Yeah, there's like a whole bunch of.
Yeah.
I mean, we could add a check to see if there's a file for that, but
yeah, this is very similar to something I had to do with my node-log POPR, where I had to basically end up checking if it could be a file, like if host could be a file. But then if you just say it equals host, do you just assume it's C:/host?
I think it'd be C: Windows System 32 hosts or wherever it is, right?
So, excuse me.
Is it easy enough, Claudio, to just add some if statement in there that will prevent us from having to think about this too much more?
We could check if there's a file path for that. If so, we can just treat it as a regular result.conf file.
It does look like this OS open. Is it? I'm going to guess that it doesn't read relative paths.
Yeah.
And so that would technically maybe be a break and change, but if we add that additional check in there, we would mitigate that, I guess.
Sure, I can amend it.
That seems like the easiest thing to do is if you have that additional check. I mean, it's not like it's in the API that we support the thing that we're breaking here, right? So
Mhm.
it's not really a breaking change. It's just something that some change in behavior and undocumented behavior that people probably shouldn't be relying on, right?
It's definitely not documented.
As in, it's not documented that if you just say host, it could potentially also resolve to a file.
There's not a ton of document. Well, we don't have any Windows specific documentation on this. Like, I think there was even we were not sure, thinking that this would even work with a file on the kubelet today for Windows.
Yeah, we should have some documentation for the kubelet flag as well for Windows. I can follow up on that after we resolve this issue. And in regards to the path character limitations while using absolute paths, I remember that Windows used to have or still has a limit on how many characters you have as a path.
Unless you use like the fully qualified path name, which is
Yeah, the
like
UNC
whack
path.
whack slash something or other.
I don't think, like, I don't think that's going to be an issue in the kubelet. Either everything in Go is converting the paths to the UNC paths, or nothing is. So I don't think we need to be concerned about that here.
Okay.
But it's a good question. Yeah, it was 240 characters.
So we'll go forward then with it and add that check.
Mhm.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Cool. Do we want to talk about KPNG or 127 next?
We can talk about the 127 major themes right now. Either the docs or the communications team for the 127 release is asking each SIG if they want, like, what they want, or like to provide some major themes for the release. And we should probably do that. I think they want that done by today. So we could, maybe we'll just start a thread in Slack for that right after the meeting. Because I think one of the big ones, Arvind, is your node service or your node log viewer changes.
Just remind me, given I'm still coming up to speed on all the SIG-Chair stuff and all there was a request to send out a video, right? That's separate to this?
That's a separate request.
Okay.
So there's also, I think I should have mentioned this here too. So for KubeCon, what they're doing now is, I think as one part of one of the keynote speeches, they're asking if each SIG or working group would like to submit a 45-second video SIG update for the SIG. And for that, we would need to opt into that by the end of this week and provide that 45-second video clip by the end of next week. So I guess we could just decide right now if we want to do that and figure
I
out
think
what we
we
want.
should definitely do it.
Yep.
I'll do it unless somebody else wants to do it. I have no desire to do it, but I will totally do it unless someone else wants to do it.
Okay, I will today opt the SIG-Windows in, just so we're done with that, and then we can just know that there's a deadline for providing that 45-second video by next Friday.
Okay, does anybody want to do it? Because I could totally do it and I don't mind doing it. I just, if somebody, especially somebody new to the community here, we got a few people hanging out. Somebody wants to do the video, I'm happy to help you create the content, and we can get Arvind and everyone else and Mark and James and Claudio to help us figure out what we want to say.
Yeah, there were a couple, I wouldn't say guidelines, but suggestions on how to format it since it's so quick. We'll start another Slack channel or another thread in Slack.
Yeah.
And
Before we even start that, I'm just wondering, if anyone else wants to do it?
yeah.
Speak up, let us know.
I also, so I was not fully clear, like does it have to be one of the leads or the chairs to make the video? It was not clear to me.
I don't think it
I
has
think so.
to be. I think the
What are they gonna
leads
do? Reject
should-
it? Are they gonna, you think they're gonna check?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't care. Like anybody can do it.
No,
I'm just saying.
I think, I mean, I would imagine I would encourage other people to do that
Yeah.
too. I think,
I just don't want someone to take the effort and then it gets rejected by, them. That's all.
Yeah,
I think as
usually
long
anybody
as
can do it.
Anybody, as long as the SIG leads aren't saying like, no, we don't want
Okay.
this content there.
No,
I'm sure.
I'm a +1 to anybody doing it.
And if 45 seconds is too short, we could actually make it a 2x video.
They said no to that specifically.
Oh,
Yeah,
Like you cannot speed it up and things like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
they won't notice.
Mhm.
Anyways, yeah, definitely. If someone wants to do it, or we could do it together, I'm happy to do it with someone else too. I just want to make sure that we don't miss the deadline to do it. So that's why I'm saying I'm going to do it.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, I'll help in any way.
Okay. Yeah.
First deadline is opting in, so I'll just take care of that.
Okay, cool. So how about this, Mark? You can start the thread once you take care of the deadline, and then I will put a Google Doc up and people can add whatever they want, and I'll bug folks. And by Thursday, whatever's in there, I'll present, unless somebody says they want to present it. And I think it would be great to have a new face in the SIG presenting something. So strongly
Yep.
encourage anybody on the call who wants to do this. Okay, cool.
Okay, and we'll start a thread for the 127 major themes too.
Mhm.
Cool. KPNG direction. Who
You
wants
want to
take
start with
one?
this, Jay, Michael?
Yeah, overall, I think what we're kind of looking at is we've written a KEP a few times for KPNG, and nobody's really had time to finish the KEP and like really have all the debates necessary to make it an official in-tree replacement. And I
This
think
is SIG Network, right? That you're
SIG
talking about that's writing the KEP?
yeah. And I think the overall direction is that the focus on SIG Network side is going to be really on the Linux side of things. I mean, we could refactor things and try to get everything in tree, but I don't even know if that's the right direction, because I see so many people making out of tree proxies. Antria is one of them, Cilium's another, Calico's a third. We would not be the first people to be doing this. So I think the current direction, the way I see it, is just to keep kind of doing what we're doing, and see if we can actually get it to work, this new Windows out of tree proxy. And then if we're successful and people adopt it and start using it, then I think we can really volunteer to like, hey, this seems to be working. Do you want us to take the proxy out of tree, or do you want to keep it around forever? Or, I mean, I feel like that's where things are going. And I think on the KPNG side, I think KPNG is a convenient tool for us to implement this with, but I don't think it's essential. I think long-term, if SIG Network comes out and writes some generic batteries included cross-platform unopinionated proxy implementation that does what KPNG does, I don't see that happening anytime soon, but like if that did happen, I don't see any reason why we couldn't just use that for our Windows out of tree proxy, right? So I was talking to Mark and we're like, yeah, let's see if we can get this up and running, really working within 6 months. And if so, we'll just keep using KPNG for everything. And if within that time something better comes out, we'll start rebasing onto that. But I think the hard part is getting it all working, getting CI around it, making it so that it passes the node port test, which it fails right now. So we're kind of leaning towards doing the hard part first, as opposed to doing the paperwork. But either way, you get screwed over, right? You do the paperwork and then run out of time, or you could do the hard part and run out of time to do the paperwork, but we're kind of leaning towards doing the work first and see if we can get it working. My focus is mostly on seeing if we can get developer environments up, so that anybody can contribute to it easily. And I think we're getting closer with the QAMU ones now. But I know Mike, you were interested also. So what's on your mind, or anyone else?
I don't
I
think I particularly
go
had anything, I was always just curious about direction. I think Dan Winship said it pretty well in the thread that you started but ideally, the KEP would get finished in some shape or capacity. However, just getting KEPs through is, pulling teeth and chopping your fingers off. So it's not the most fun. Yeah, so I have really no opinions. I mean, if the KEP does get written then in a way that SIG network can accept, that'll be great, because then it can be presented and then we can agree that that's the direction that we want to head in.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely I saw that thread and I responded. I was like, yeah, I definitely think it's a great idea to write a KEP if someone wants to go off and do it. I think we're 4 KEPs deep at this point, and I don't see a 5th one being any more successful, right? Like, I don't, I think at this point, even SIG Network isn't sure that they want to build a generic kube proxy replacement. Like, I think the only thing they're sure of is that they need to replace IP tables with NFT, right? So, I think it's just a tricky, I think it
Yeah.
benefits people who are using non-Linux native technology more than it benefits people using Linux native stuff, because the Linux native stuff can just go in tree. So why would you write in generic implementation, right? So I was just talking to the Antria folks yesterday, and like they have the same problem, right, of vendoring and all that. And so, but if anyone wants to help write a KEP, definitely, I think we could write a formal KEP to replace the entry Windows proxy and so on and so forth. We could kind of do both at the same time if we wanted to, right?
My concerns about this are still kind of the same as when we talked about moving or creating the out of tree kube proxy. I think that we were talking a little bit about paperwork versus doing work. I think we've got enough of the paperwork done, and we already have the sub project set up that we can move forward with the out of tree proxy without the SIG network KEP. I don't think anybody's going, like, we can just ask for forgiveness if we need to. I don't think, or I still am kind of under the opinion that I would rather not have to have SIG-Windows maintain all of the generic or KPNG logic around, like, reading the API server, responding to that, maintaining the gRPC, kind of the protobuf contracts, just because that's not kind of our expertise. But I do think it makes sense to maintain the Win kernel proxy and the parts that actually does the HNS programming out of tree. So it would be great if SIG network would volunteer to, or like support the generic parts of the kube proxy and the API server watching and all of that. So that's really like my biggest concern, is I don't know what to do with that. Because I think that would probably be too much work for this group to maintain if we had to.
Yeah.
Wasn't that what that last KEP was supposed to solve, that concern, Mark?
It was, but is that kept going anywhere?
Jake?
No way. I think we've,
Yeah.
nobody's writing any KEPs anymore. Like,
is there still one thing? I didn't read everything, but I know that there's like no KEP, but are people still either committing to or wanting to maintain the KPNG and keep it up to date?
oh yeah, I mean, that's for sure. Well, so I mean, if you look at KPNG, I'd say there's more people contributing to KPNG right now than there are the entry kube proxy. So if you go look at open pull requests, you've got 5 different people from 5 different companies, right? So, yeah, right. Part of part of the goal with KPNG is make it easy and fun for people to work on the kube proxy. And I think that's been successful. I think the question is, how do we mentor people to get to that next level, right? Where we can get more and more people other than Mikhail, Stoikas, people like who really know the code base inside out. And so I think there's a ton of community work we have to keep doing, but it's definitely far from, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot of stuff going on there. So yeah, go ahead.
James, I think you raised your hand first.
Yeah, so I guess it seems like there's always going to be a place for some out of tree kube proxy implementations, like, right, like there's just like the in-tree thing is just not going to meet everybody's needs, but it makes sense to have an in-tree, and it makes sense to build a community around, building an out of tree one for those folks, like you mentioned early on, and SIG-Windows would just be part of that. So I think it seems like there'll always be those things, and so it makes sense to give it a shot here, see if we can get a community going around these types of things, and see if we can get some advantages out of it. So I think.
Oh yeah, and what Jay kind of mentioned a 6-month timeline. I was talking to Jay a little bit about this yesterday too, and I think that we were kind of thinking that maybe putting like a deadline of like at the end of the 128 development cycle, which is probably going to be about 6 months out, as that time, and then either reevaluate how the out of tree kube proxy is going, and hopefully, like, if it's close, if it's ready to be used or not, and then see if we want to continue with an out of tree kube proxy at that point or not, really.
Yeah. Or we could do the other thing me and Mark talked about is if people really want us to stay in tree, I think it's easy to make an argument to not be in tree, given the direction of all of Kubernetes, but if people really have strong opinions that Kubernetes needs to ship with an in-tree Windows kube proxy, then we could just go 100% in tree. But I think there's a middle ground where we could say, look, we'll just figure out a way to literally take the code out of the in-tree proxy and literally do it verbatim out of tree, which is what every single other non-Linux IP tables kube proxy has gone off and done, right?
Yeah,
but
a lot of stuff to vendor in though.
Yeah, the other question I have, Jay, is like, would the in-tree stuff then be deprecated?
For Windows, yeah.
People stop maintaining it, yeah. If people don't stop maintaining it, it doesn't need to be deprecated. That,
I mean, so that's where, right, I feel like we should have at least one go-to place for Windows folks, either in tree or KPNG. But
tree or in tree or out of tree, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, in tree or out of tree. Like one go-to like we have today. Today the go-to is in-tree kube proxy for Windows. Yeah. I think if you give people choices and the choices are not clear, it could lead to some form of
right now it's in tree because there isn't anything else. So someday,
what we're kind of proposing here is saying let's give the out of tree kube proxy based on KPNG 6 months to stabilize and make sure it can kind of perform on par with the in-tree kube proxy, but it's easier for like SIG-Windows and other contributors to get changes in. And if we can't do that, then we'll do something. Then we'll kind of either go back to focusing on the in-tree kube proxy, or take the in-tree code and just make that the out-of-tree kube proxy code and maintain that. But I could see that being a lot of maintenance burden. But yeah,
I mean, all these decisions, in my opinion, can be deferred, right? Like we just don't have anything other than an in-tree proxy right now, right?
I do want to do a time check. We're 5 minutes over our scheduled time. And I saw, Mike, did you have your hand up? Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of curious if there's a lot of people contributing to the Win kernel, proxy if it was worth kind of, well, just saying what Jay said, try to, wrangle them into like, the fellowship of KPMG and get it kept done, aka like, toss the ring into, Mordor kind of thing and get it done. So then we can address some of Mark's concerns. So we're not maintaining everything. Because if there's interest, I think that's all we need. Especially, if it's VMware and Red Hat, and I don't know who else, 3, 4, and 5 was. And if we can, wrangle the Antria folks, Celium and Calico as well, to kind of, because they're moving away. Oh, they have moved away. So it does sound like there could be some, tangible, effort here, and there is interest to do it. I'm just kind of curious if that's been tried or if it's just fallen apart.
I think it's mostly falling apart. There are some folks from Microsoft who are maintaining it, but I know they're super busy and it's not their primary focus right now, the entry queue proxy.
Yeah.
We should maybe talk about that. Mike, that was actually, I was like, we're talking to Mark, I was like, yeah, maybe Mike can help us think more about that. So we should probably talk more offline about that also. Like, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, the concern I brought up months and months ago to SIG Network was, the exit, what I called the exodus of kube proxy, because your big names, Celium, Tigera, and Antria have all abandoned, kube proxy, and I'm sure they're doing that for a reason. One, for they don't need it. However, it made more sense to kind of investigate the whys that was happening and prevent it from happening, or allow a more seamless transition for that to happen. Because eventually, if I forget, I'm sure on the Linux side and Windows side, they don't use KP at all for the 3 listed here. So, eventually I would just assume everybody would leave and there would be no entry unless, there was a cap to kind of address that, or if, API gateway was the, the way of the future or more. I kind of never got an answer to that question. So that's what kind of was I going to ask earlier too.
I mean, I feel like there needs to be a cap. I just feel like the people who have to write the cap have to be the people who are it's like Tim or Dan or someone needs to write that cap, I think. Like,
yeah,
you can't guess what the right answer is to this problem, right? Like there's 1,000 possible answers to it, right? So it's just an NP complete problem to try to guess what people will agree on, right? So you just need somebody with the ability to just make a decision to do that, right?
Yep. And Antonio actually raised an interesting point to write this just as a specification, similar to like network policy and more, where you just have the types and then it's implemented, and then there's no more in-tree proxies. You're just implementing the spec.
That's kind of what KPMG gives you, though. It's right. Like you get that for free with KPMG, right? So I'm like, that's why I'm like, we just go with what works, and then if somebody writes a better interface, we can re-implement another interface. But I feel like our problem has been solved.
Cool. So,
I
so I think
probably over time
here, and I don't know that we're going to solve the SIG networking thing here, but I think we've generally agreed to move forward with the queue proxy for Windows out of tree for now with the timeline, and then we'll check in 6 months and see where we're at.
Timer starts. Yeah. Anybody wants to help, let us know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, we're quite a bit past time, so I'm going to wrap up the meeting here. There is one last thing. There's a PR to check out for QEMU. Go ahead and click on that link and give a review. Otherwise, we'll see you all next week.
Yeah, I think more than a review, we need someone to test it. I will test it for Linux.
Okay. I can hang out a little longer. I see Andy and other folks are here in case anybody wants to. I've got another 10 minutes.
All right. See you on Slack, folks.
I've got a couple minutes too. Claudio, do you need anything for the